All right, let's talk about coffee. And I mean really talk about it, because this is so much more than just your morning pick-me-up. We're going to dive into how this one simple drink has totally changed the world and how it literally gets in there and rewires your brain every single day.
I mean, just look at this number. 2 billion cups. That's not per year, that's not per month, that's every single day. Think about that for a second. It's not just a habit, right? It's a full-blown global ritual. The scale is just mind-boggling.
And what's driving this whole thing? Well, it's this one little molecule, caffeine. But here's where it gets really interesting. We call it a drink, right? But let's be scientific for a second. Caffeine is, technically, the most widely consumed psychoactive drug on the entire planet. Yeah, a drug, because it actively changes how your brain works.
So that leads us to the big question we're tackling today. What is this stuff really doing? To us, to our world, to our bodies? And to figure that out, we're going to go on two different journeys. First, we're going to look outward, into history, to see how coffee completely changed society. And then we're going to journey inward, to see what it's doing inside your brain right now.
Okay, so let's start with that outward journey. And believe it or not, the story of how coffee took over the world, it all begins with some goats.
Yeah, you heard me right. Goats.
So the legend goes, way back in the 9th century, this goat herder in Ethiopia named Kaldi sees his goats just going nuts, dancing around after eating these little red berries. He tries them and boom. Fast forward a few hundred years to the 15th century over in Yemen. That's where they first thought, hey, let's roast these things. And that's when we get the drink we know today. After that, it exploded. Coffee houses started popping up all over the Ottoman Empire, and then, and this is the key part, it makes its way to Europe. And once it hits Europe, it becomes way, way more than just a place to grab a drink.
Right. And this is where the story takes a major turn. Because when coffee arrived in Europe, it wasn't just some new beverage trend. No, it was a catalyst, an engine for massive change. And it had both a really bright side and a really, really dark one.
So, get this. There's this massive theory, put forward by academics like Jürgen Habermas, that without coffee, we might not even have had the Enlightenment. I mean, that's a huge claim, right? But the idea is that these new coffee houses became the literal hotspots, the incubators, where people gathered to talk business, politics, and hatch these radical new ideas that would change everything.
And you can just picture the scene, right? You've got guys like Voltaire, who, by the way, supposedly drank up to 72 cups a day. That's not a typo. 72. And they're all just buzzing on caffeine, questioning absolutely everything. It was this shift away from old ways of thinking towards science and logic, and it directly led to revolutions, democracy, and massive breakthroughs in science.
But we have to be honest here. There's another side to this story, a much darker one. For every coffeehouse buzzing with ideas of freedom and democracy, there was an engine of exploitation running somewhere else. The insane demand for coffee, it directly fueled the slave trade, especially in places like Haiti and Brazil. And even later, that coffee break we all know, it wasn't invented to be nice. It was a calculated business move to squeeze more productivity out of workers. So you have this total contradiction, an engine for ideas and an engine for exploitation, all at once.
Okay, so that's the big, messy, world-changing story of coffee. Now let's zoom all the way in. Let's take that second journey we talked about, the inward one. What is actually happening on a chemical level, inside your brain, every single time you take a sip?
We all know the feeling, right? You're groggy, you can barely function. You have a cup of coffee, and suddenly you're awake. But how? How does it actually work? What is that liquid doing to flip a switch in your head from off to on?
Well, it's basically a story of two chemicals. On one team, you've got adenosine. You can think of adenosine as the sleepy molecule. Your body makes it all day long, and the more you have, the more tired you feel. It's basically your brain's signal to chill out and go to sleep. And on the other team, you have caffeine. And caffeine, well, caffeine is a master of disguise. It's an imposter, because its chemical shape looks almost exactly like adenosine's. And that, right there, is the whole trick.
So here's what goes down. Imagine your brain cells have all these little parking spots, or receptors. The sleepy molecule, adenosine, is shaped perfectly to pull into those spots. When it parks, it tells the cell, hey, slow down, time for a break. But then, you drink coffee. Caffeine floods your system. And because it's a great imposter, it zips in and steals all the good parking spots. It fits right into the receptors, but it doesn't send the slow down signal. It just blocks the spot. So now adenosine is driving around with nowhere to park. The sleepy signal can't get through, and your brain does the exact opposite. It speeds up, and that's when you feel wide awake.
So how long does this last? Well, you'll feel that first jolt pretty quick, sometimes in just 15 minutes. You hit your peak alertness for maybe a couple of hours. But here's the crazy part. It can take your body anywhere from 5 to 10 hours to get rid of all that caffeine. 10 hours. And even after that, some effects can stick around, which explains perfectly why that 3 p.m. coffee can sometimes have you staring at the ceiling at midnight.
Okay, so we know how it works. Now for the practical part. How much is too much? Let's break down the numbers and create a kind of user's guide for coffee, looking at both the good and the bad.
So the general rule of thumb for most healthy adults is to stick to around 400 milligrams of caffeine a day. What does that mean in real terms? We're talking about 4, maybe 5 regular cups of coffee. If you start going past that, you're entering the territory of side effects. And if you go way, way over, like 1,200 milligrams, which is about 12 cups in a short time, things can get genuinely toxic.
And what are those side effects? I'm sure we've all been there at some point. You know, you can't sleep, you feel all jittery and anxious, maybe your heart is beating a little too fast. You might get an upset stomach or even a headache. That's basically just your body screaming, hey, you've blocked way too many of my parking spots.
But it's not all bad news. Not even close. We've got to balance the scales here. Because when you drink it in moderation, studies have shown that coffee is actually linked to some amazing health benefits. We're talking a lower risk for really serious stuff, like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, even some cancers and Parkinson's. And it's not just about the caffeine. Coffee's also loaded with powerful antioxidants.
So, there you have it, the whole story. It's a tale of two journeys, right? On one hand, you have this substance that's powerful enough to fuel revolutions and change the entire global economy. And on the other hand, it's doing this incredibly precise, delicate chemical dance inside your head every single morning.
So, let me leave you with this final thought. The next time you grab your morning coffee, what are you going to see? Is it just a cup of hot brown liquid? Or will you see the entire history of the world and the amazing chemistry of your own mind, all swirling together in that one little cup?